Hi, thanks for checking out this video commentary track of AngryBots Remix, my submission for the Leonard Paul School of Video Game Audio Unity course. Over this video we're going to take a quick look at the sound effects and design process. After that we're going to look at exactly how that was implemented and a little bit of the coding behind that. Beyond that, take a quick look at the adaptive score as well, and both the code and the music that supports that, and finally some of the game tweaks that I added, just to add a little bit of sizzle to the final product. With that in mind, let's dig straight in. So my first step in the sound design process was really just to have a look at the style of the game from a visual perspective and see, rather than try and recreate what already existed, I wanted to try and reimagine what that would sound like. I felt that really the original sounds were far too clean, far too small sounding, that this whole thing is meant to feel like a massive warehouse industrial complex with broken bits falling off and steam everywhere and machines that clunk and clang. And so I really wanted to get that added into the whole universe of this game. So once I had that design concept in my head, I then ran through the game with play after play after play, having a look at not just what sound effects were in the original Unity engine, but where I felt effects were needed. So rather than worry about just simply replacing what was already there, I wanted to make sure that I felt that all the right bases were covered. So I then plotted that all out in the spreadsheet, worked out initially what sounds I thought should be there, then on top of that what I felt they would probably sound like, and based on that what elements I would need in order to make those sounds. So knowing what kind of sounds I had to capture, it was time to hit the streets of Brighton with my pocket recorder in tow and see what I could find. One of the first things I came across were the classic industrial bins, the dumpsters, which are great when you hit your trainer against them, but I also then went and bought a little xylophone hammer that I could use just to get a slightly sharper sound, which is good for more of the spider tingly noises as it crawls across the floor. We had our passing bin lorry, which is a garbage truck for those that don't know what a bin is. And I actually stopped them one morning running out in my dressing gown because it was still, early in the day, and I asked very politely if they wouldn't mind me holding up my little recorder against their big garbage truck, which kind of makes big servo noises, big piston noises, things like that, which was perfect for the kind of sounds that I wanted to get across. On top of that, there were things like my oven in my kitchen, which turned out to make a really good screeching metal noise because it's a little bit rusty. Amazingly, I found I got a lot of usage out of simply the sound of my own microwave door, which gave a really good clunk, as did a chain on one of the dumpsters. On top of that, there were also a few other things like a real-life recording of rain, because I live in Britain and a rain sample really isn't hard to come by. And then it came to things like making the gun sounds, where although I did actually get an offer from my father-in-law to go with him to a gun range, I realised my equipment probably couldn't handle it, and even if it could, the kinds of guns that they've got access to aren't really the kind of guns that feature in this game. In the end I cheated and used my belt buckle amongst other things to get that sound across, although I did, I will admit, have to visit freesound.org just to grab one or two extra bits for texture. In this case there was the sound of a passing jet engine that I used, which gives a really good rumble and crackle, and indeed a real Gatling gun type sound. So that really gives you some idea of some of the sounds. On top of that, I did layer a lot of electronic noises, which were mostly driven through creating sound effects in Massive and Native Instruments Razor. I think I used in one or two. So it was all that blended together to give that both electronic sound. Oh, there was one other sound which I was quite pleased of, because I'd been using freesound samples of that sort of piston hydraulic release, that noise. And in the end I replaced them all because I realised I'd literally been sat here all along with access to that noise, as my chair has a little back support valve that you can release the air pressure from and squeeze the air pressure from, and the air pressure release valve gives the perfect sound. There was obviously a large amount of replacement because they already had a lot of the actions covered, but with my new sounds that I wanted to add on top. So that was really just a case of going through the back end, finding where the noises were, finding where they were housed, and adjusting volume and detection levels, that kind of thing, to make sure that when you could hear them, they were balanced out for the new soundscape. Partly because things they'd built into the original engine didn't actually work, which surprised me. Things like the Footstep Engine, I'd seen lots of comments about this if you look at the forums and the answers area. It turns out, although they've built in a theoretical material detection system, which should tell when the player is walking over a catwalk as opposed to walking over a standard walkway, etc., it doesn't work, and no one seems to know why, even because the code looks like it should. It just doesn't function. So unfortunately for that, I had to do a workaround, and in this case what I did was create a load of empty game objects that sat over the top of the areas that I wanted a different walkway. And so I used them as collision triggers, and whenever you collided and entered inside the object, it changed your footsteps to a different array. I simply copied their code and added an extra array, which was play a catwalk, and just created a simple Boolean statement that said whether or not you're inside that trigger zone. If you are in the trigger zone, then start playing the footsteps that match the catwalk, and when you leave that trigger zone, go back to the regular indoor footsteps. And it was really as simple as doing that. I also added in a couple of other things like the hover for the buzzer. And so, as well as just being a hover sound, rather than just simply looping, I wanted it to react to the speed of the buzzer. So I created a little script that measured the acceleration and the velocity of the vehicle at any time, and related that to the pitch of the audio. So those are a couple of things that I replaced. There were a few things like there were little pipes and fans that are ejecting steam. In the prefab, I created a randomization script for the pitch, so that when you went by each one, even if there were 2 or 3 side by side, you wouldn't end up with that horrible phasing effect where you realise that 2 samples are playing at exactly the same time. One of the other sounds that I added was also the hacking noise, so that when you go up to the computers and try and unlock the machines, you see a little bar go up, but there was never a sound to accompany that, and I always found that a bit of a shame, a bit of a lost moment. So let's take a look at the music score. In the first instance, I had it changed so that when you're under attack, the score changes and tells you that you're now under attack. The main problems when doing this is, of course, that often you can be under attack by more than one enemy at once, and if you have a trigger that simply activates every time they detect you, it will start again out of time, and it will be really jarring, and it really will sound very amateurish. So one of the key goals with this was to make sure that it didn't overlap, that once you were in that detection, it couldn't then start another layer on top and interrupt what you were doing, or play more than one sound at once. Equally, it had to then reset back to the generic walking around exploring music once the battle was over. So that all worked reasonably well in the first instance after a lot of toing and throwing and lots of error and pulling my hair out. But once we accomplished that system, I realised it needed to go a little bit further. As I said, first thing I did was add this one-shot piece of music to tell you that the battle was over, because otherwise it just sort of jumped straight back into the original music, and it felt a bit jarring. But finally, one of the big things I wanted to do was make a big deal out of the mechs, because the mechs are big, they're heavy, they're hard to kill, and they're real bosses in the truest sense. So with that in mind, I created a whole separate score that would activate specifically when you're under attack and detected by one of the mechs. But the big problem with this is, of course, if you're already in an attack sequence with another enemy, you now want that one to take a back seat because the boss battle's more important. So I had to create a system whereby if the mech was in play, you couldn't get that music interrupted by one of the lower tier enemies. But I felt there was something missing from it, which really came down to the fact that for a big boss, there's absolutely no way of knowing how far through the fight you are. They haven't developed any kind of UI that tells you or responds to the player. So I decided to address that by creating a system that checks the health of the mech boss, and once it gets below a 50% threshold, the soundtrack changes to a more inspiring soundtrack that I felt would add to the drama, maybe reduce from the tension, start to make you feel like you've got the upper hand now, and potentially make the player feel a bit more gung-ho about what they're doing, which in turn means they're more likely to get killed and have everything reset. Finally then, I just wanted to let you know about a couple of tweaks that I did to the game engine. So the first and simple tweak was to go around all the enemies, play test, and adapt the health levels so that it actually took you a little bit longer, it was a little bit harder for you to kill them, and therefore you're more likely to run into other enemies. It's going to make the game last that much longer, you're going to get a chance to hear the soundtracks for longer, and hopefully it will enhance the experience. But the really big thing that I wanted to do was make the whole enemy mech boss battle feel more dramatic. I simply zoomed the camera in a long way, so you were much closer, had a much shorter view around you of what was there. And I made sure that once the battle was over, the camera would reset. However, it would check to see if there were other enemies still attacking you, and if they were still attacking you, the camera wouldn't reset when the music does, just so that would still feel like part of the same battle, so that you wouldn't feel immediately like, right, that's over, back to normal, and that you wouldn't necessarily lose the position of enemies that are trying to attack you and potentially mess up your game. So really those are the main changes that I made to the game. Please do like, comment, subscribe, whatever works for you, and let me know what you thought of the video, let me know what you thought of the audio, and if you are interested in finding out more, please get in touch. Yeah, thank you very much for watching, take care.